Okay, so we're moving on to chapter 2 today, and so here's a short summary of the whole chapter, and then we'll get on to the first part. So most people never think about having an address. You grow up with one, you put it on forms, banks ask for it, government departments expect it, and life carries on. But the moment you move onto a boat, into a van, or onto off-grid land, you discover something strange. Having somewhere to live and having an address are not the same thing. For many travellers, boat dwellers and off-grid residents, the simplest solution is to use a friend or family member's address. It provides a stable point of contact for banks, driving licences, insurance and official correspondence. But not everyone has that option, and it can become inconvenient if you're constantly on the move. People living on their own land often assume ownership automatically gives them an official address. In reality, it usually doesn't. You can own a piece of land, have a gate, a track, and even the name for the place, yet still have no recognised residential address that institutions will accept. Boat dwellers face similar problems. Some residential moorings and marinas can provide a usable postal address, but many cannot. And for continuous cruisers who move around the waterways without a permanent mooring, the challenge is even greater. As a result, many people rely on mail forwarding services, community networks, PO boxes and poste restante to receive post while remaining mobile. Some even develop informal arrangements with local post offices, delivery drivers or postmen who understand the realities of alternative living. The chapter also looks at one of the biggest practical issues of all, identification. Passports, driving licences and proof of address are increasingly required for everyday life. Yet obtaining and maintaining them can be difficult if you do not live in conventional housing. What emerges throughout this chapter is a simple reality. The modern system assumes everyone has a recognised address, but thousands of people living on the road, on waterways and off-grid land do not fit neatly into that model. So they create workarounds, combining correspondence addresses, mail services and practical local knowledge to remain connected to a society that was never really designed with them in mind. So this is chapter 2, getting an address, postal service and identification, and this is part 15 in the video series. So we're told that everyone has an address, but that only works if you live in the way the system expects you to live. Once you move onto a boat, into a van, off-grid, things become less straightforward. You may have somewhere to sleep, you may have somewhere to keep your possessions, but proving where you live can suddenly become surprisingly difficult. Because once you actually try to live outside conventional housing, even receiving a letter can become a challenge. If you don't have an address, how do you prove you exist? That's what we'll talk about today. Use a friend or family member's address. So even if we try to get away from the modern world, there are a number of reasons why you might need to get post, legal documents, financial documents, equipment delivery or energy, gas, wood, etc. There are several ways that a traveller or off-grid dweller can get an address, and these are outlined here. People living on boats face a slightly different version of the same problem. Even where a boat has a recognised mooring, this does not always function as a standard residential address. Continuous cruisers who do not have a fixed mooring will usually have no usable address at all in the conventional sense. As a result, most boat dwellers rely on the same hybrid solutions as travellers and off-grid land dwellers, combining a correspondence address with flexible collection methods. So one of the simplest ways to deal with the lack of a fixed address is to ask a trusted friend or family member if you can use their address as a mailing address. This is often called a care of address and can be useful for receiving post, registering with services or dealing with official bodies. In many cases you simply put CO, care of, before the person's name or at the start of the address, depending on how the household prefers it to be written. The important point is that the person whose address you are using understands that you are only receiving mail there, and you are not claiming to live at the property unless this is genuinely the case. This is usually the easiest solution, although it can become inconvenient if you are travelling a long way from the address and need to collect post regularly. Sometimes there may also be reasons why the person whose address you are using needs to be cautious about how it is used. For example, the property may be rented, part of an agricultural tenancy, or held within a trust arrangement where declaring additional residents could create complications. It is therefore always best to discuss the details clearly beforehand so that everyone understands how the address will be used. This approach is particularly common among boat dwellers, especially those without a permanent mooring, as it provides a stable address for licensing, banking and official correspondence. So living on land without a recognised address. One of the most common misunderstandings is that owning or occupying land automatically gives you an address. In practice, it does not. An address only becomes official when a property is recognised as a lawful dwelling within the planning system and registered accordingly. Without that, you may have a physical location but no address that institutions will accept. Many people living off-grid find themselves in this position. They may have land access, even a gate and a name for the place, but no postcode and no formal recognition as a residence. From a legal and administrative point of view, they effectively do not live there. This creates a range of practical problems. Banks, assurers and government agencies usually require a recognised residential address. The DVLA expects one for vehicle registration and driving licences. GP surgeries and other services often ask for proof of address. Without something that appears on official systems, applications can be refused or delayed. In some cases, a postcode may exist for the land or a nearby property, and this can be used informally. However, this does not guarantee acceptance. Organisations may still check whether the address corresponds to a registered dwelling, and if it does not, it may be rejected. Even where posts can physically reach a site, that does not mean the address is considered valid. There is also a balancing act to consider. Making a site more visible by trying to formalise an address can sometimes draw attention from planning authorities, particularly if the land does not have permission for residential use. Some people therefore choose to keep arrangements informal and rely on alternative addresses, while others attempt to regularise their situation over time. In practice, most off-grid land dwellers end up using a hybrid approach. The land itself functions as a base, but official correspondence is routed through a friend, family member or mail service. It is not an ideal solution, but it reflects the gap between how people actually live and how the system recognises where people live. Understanding this distinction early on can save a great deal of frustration. Having land is one thing, having an address that the system accepts is something else entirely. Moorings and marina addresses. For boat dwellers with a permanent residential mooring, it may be possible to use the mooring as a postal address. Some marinas and residential mooring sites accept and distribute post to berth holders, effectively acting as a managed delivery point. However, this varies widely. Some moorings are officially recognised as residential and may appear in address databases. Others are leisure moorings only and are not accepted as residential addresses, even if people live there in practice. Even when post can be delivered, institutions may still reject the address if it is not registered as a dwelling. For this reason, most boat dwellers with moorings still maintain a separate correspondence address for official purposes. So continuous cruising and lack of fixed address. Boat dwellers who continuously cruise, move in regularly along the waterways without a fixed mooring, effectively have no fixed address at all. Their situation is closer to road living than land-based off-grid living. Because their location changes frequently, receiving post directly on the boat is rarely practical. Most continuous cruisers rely on a friend or family address, a mail forwarding service, and occasionally use post restaurante. We'll talk about that in the next section, when travelling through known locations. This reinforces the need for a stable contact address outside the boat itself. So modern society assumes everyone has a recognised address, and if that's true, anyone living differently is forced to find workarounds just to access ordinary services, which means the issue may not just be receiving post, opening bank accounts or proving your ID. It might actually be about the system, who the system is prepared to recognise as having a legitimate place in society. And if that's the case, how free are you to live differently if your existence depends on fitting into someone else's idea of where you should live? Okay, next up, still on chapter 2, getting an address, postal service and ID, and we'll cover mail forwarding services, community network addresses, PO box and post restante.